This week on Black Refresh 2020, we have Loki Mulholland, founder and executive director of the Joan Trumpauer Mulholland Foundation, whose mission is to end racism through education. Loki is also an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker whose documentaries tell the untold stories of racism and the civil rights movement. Loki has inherited the courage and passion to fight racism from his history-making mother, Joan.
All right, welcome to another episode of Black Refresh 2020. I am your host, Todd Inman. Today, we are actually blessed to have a gentleman by the name of Loki Mulholland. He is the founder and executive director of the Joan Trumpauer Mulholland Foundation. So thanks so much for joining me, Loki.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yes. And it looks from your bio that you're actually in Utah.
I am, yeah.
Yeah. You're actually probably one of the first people, if not the first person I ever met from Utah. So just in terms of what we have going on with this pandemic, what's life like out there right now?
I think it's pretty much just like for everyone else. You know, I mean, it's they're slowly trying to open things up, but they were actually pretty good about it from the get-go. So we've been very fortunate. Our numbers have been very low, but they're starting to open the. They're talking about the theaters now. They're talking about the restaurants. I'm like, man, you all be the guinea pigs. I ain't touching this.
Yeah, I get it, man. I get it. So let's jump right in, Loki. So tell me a little bit about your mom, who is Joan Trumpauer Mulholland, and all her wonderful stories, but also how that blended into you starting the foundation.
Yeah. So yeah, Joan, mom is just mom, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that's just who she is. But her story is quite remarkable. So my mom was 19 years old when she joined the Freedom Rides. It's this iconic photograph of her mugshot, this white Southern woman, and she's just so poised and so determined, and there's no fear in her eyes. But by that time, she had already been involved in about 3 dozen citizen protests when she joined the Freedom Rides, and they put them on death row in Parchman Penitentiary out in the Delta. That's not too far from where, right down the road from where Emmett Till was killed. Mm-hmm. And after that, once she was released, a couple months later, she went to Tougaloo College, HBCU, just right outside Jackson. She was the first white student there. And then she would, a couple years later, join Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated.
Yes.
So, right on. And and most people know my mom from the back of her head, right? There's this iconic photograph of her at the lunch counter in Jackson, World War sit-in, May 28th, 1963. And there's Ann Moody, my mother, and John Salter. It's actually the most integrated sit-in in the movement because you have African-American woman, a white woman, and then John, who appears to be white, but he's actually Native American. But there's the photo of people pouring the stuff in my mom's head. And you can actually see that recreation of that, the statue of my mother at the National Civil Rights Museum at a lunch counter. But that image and that story is just so compelling. It's everywhere. But so she's kind of the Forrest Gump of civil rights. I mean, she was everywhere and knew everyone. At least everyone knew her as well. So there's pictures of her with Dr. King. I mean, she worked in Medgar's office. Her and Mrs. Hamer, Fannie Lou Hamer, would cross paths, and even to this day, there's John Lewis always wants to get his hug and those sort of things. But because this was just a family, this the civil rights community, very tight community. But she was there at the funeral for 3 of the little girls at the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. She was there with Bob Moses, helping to talking about the Freedom Summer, and in fact, she was on the Klan's most wanted list. And he talks about that list actually in Coming of Age in Mississippi in her seminal book about the movement. And her face never got X'd out, but Medgar's did, as she says in the film An Ordinary Hero. And they almost try to kill her, her and a group of friends in a car outside Canton, Mississippi in '64. Just a couple of weeks later, they ended up killing their friends instead, Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner. But my mom's story actually, a lot of people like to focus on those particular events. Her story actually begins back around 1951 when she visits her grandmother in Georgia. Every summer they'd go from Virginia down to Georgia, they'd visit that family down there. And on a dare that year, she's about 10, 11 years old. She, on this dare, goes to the black part of town. Now, they called it something else, of course. But she was struck first by how these adults would disappear. People started going behind their doors and closing the shutters to their house, or hiding behind the house, or behind the clothes on the line and stuff, because no one wanted to be seeing these two little white girls walking down the street, because if something happened to them and the police said, "Hey, did you see him?" Suddenly, that they've got someone. That's all they're looking for. They're just looking for an excuse to lynch somebody, and here's someone we can lynch. But they get to this schoolhouse, and she sees this one-room shack, as she described it, on stone piles, with an outhouse in the back and a pot-belly stove inside. No glass in the windows, not a lick of paint, as she says, and a pump for water out front. And this was in stark contrast to a brand new brick school that was built for the white kids in Oconee. And it's actually still the nicest building in Oconee, is that brick school, which is now a nursing home. But she said it rattled her soul. She said it was something that, she said, "This is wrong, I'm going to do something about it." And she didn't say, "This is wrong, hopefully someone will take care of it." She took it upon herself. And those principles from that were, a lot of people ask, well, where did she get that courage? Where did that come from? Well, it came from church. She was taught, the golden rule: do unto others you haven't done unto you. And she took it seriously, she said. She said, but white Southerners were hypocrites and weren't living what they were preaching.
Yes.
And she felt that, she needed to do something about it, and took it upon herself to do that, and would get the opportunity. Really, the main catalyst, there was a few things here and there before that, but it really went into overdrive when her mother sent her to Duke University, because it was a safe school. Safe meant segregated. And so she sends her there, and which was the worst place to send my mother, because just down the road on February 1st, 1960 was the Greensboro sit-in, which kicked off the student movement. The next sit-in was in Durham, which is where Duke is, and my mother was invited to participate in the sit-ins and such. And they say the rest is history. Yeah.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So, obviously, you being raised by your mother, and your mother is still living.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So we want to certainly let the audience understand that we're talking about a living person.
Yeah.
But you being raised by her and spending so much time with her, what do you think about her personality, her makeup? Besides the fact that she was inspired through her church exposure and her, I guess, relationship to the Bible and so forth. Right. But what about her character? You say that this is something I could believe my mom would do,
Oh, my mom said, do it. You better do it. I'll tell you that. I mean, she was, she said, my mom's just she sees things very black and white. Mm-hmm. She doesn't like the mess in the middle there. If we say that all men are created equal, then all men are created equal. If we say that we should treat each other the way we want to be treated, then that's what you do. So she's very kind of resolute, absolute in that regards. That's really how she lives her life. I mean, she says, she's very stubborn, and that can be, bullheaded, and that can be good, but that also can get her in trouble. Okay. And at times it did. She wasn't perfect. She had to learn just like everyone else. Being a Southerner in Virginia is not the same as being a Southerner in Mississippi. And there's different rules. And the deeper you got in the South, the harsher those consequences were at times. There's actually a podcast episode that I have about that called "The Wrong Time to Be Right," and where her stand almost got people killed. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So Loki, just as far as, your mom and being one of the few, white people to be this involved with the civil rights struggle back then, as far as like the rest of her career, just as a normal employee, did it have lasting effects on anything?
Oh yeah, no, it's kind of interesting. I mean, so she graduated from Tougaloo College. And her mother actually never recognized that she actually got a degree, because my grandmother was a segregationist till the day she died. Um, she went actually after school. She went back to D.C., start to raise a family. She started working for the Smithsonian, but they basically they told her, it's like, look, you're a woman. All you're going to do is get married, have babies, and quit. So I thought it was quite ironic that she was doing all this work in the civil rights movement only to be, discriminated against, based on her gender.
Yeah,
right afterwards. But she went on to actually work as an educator. She was particularly taught ESL students, and did that. Tried to take the principles that she learned in those lessons and so forth, and not only imprint them upon us, her own kids, but also the students that she had. Her ability to interact with people who didn't necessarily look like her or talk like her or had the same beliefs, helped tremendously, particularly in a situation, still Northern Virginia. This is the 80s, 70s and 80s and such in particular. There were still quite a few issues going on there in the education system as there are today, but not that far removed from the 60s. And so those principles that she had, she brought to bear. There was a story that she tells where my elementary school, the music teacher there was like international whatever day type of thing or week, and it's like, is there a song we can sing? And my mom's like, well, how about lift up your voice and sing? And the music teacher's like, what's that? She's like, well, it's the Negro National Anthem.
Right.
And so she's, well, great. And my mom says, she said, I can pretty much guarantee that was the first time that song was ever sung at an integrated school in Virginia.
Yeah.
So it was those sort of things that she would always do. Even to this day, she's very much about. We were at the opening of the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, which surprisingly is the only state-sponsored civil rights museum in the country. And it happens to be in Mississippi.
Yes.
And sure enough, the choir is doing this medley, and they break out and to lift up your voice and sing. And my mom stands up. No one else stands up.
Yeah.
My mom stands and she shoots me some daggers. Okay, I'm standing up now. I didn't see anyone else stand up, but my mom stood up, and all of a sudden everyone was like, okay, we better stand up. She's like, this is a national anthem. You stand for national anthems. So she's very, very much, by the book sort of thing.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Do you think that, do you think that as she looks back on that experience almost 60 years later, right? Yeah. Did she know then, like, what a major effort and how historically major what she was doing would become?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think she for the most part, she kind of jokes. She says, we didn't get interesting until 50 years later. now everyone wants to talk to us.
Yeah.
She did it because it was the right thing to do. She was guided by these principles, and this is what you should do.
Yeah.
As LeVon Brown says in the film, she shows the courage of her convictions. She didn't have to do this.
No.
But she knew she needed to. And so just from that alone, I don't think when you're in the moment you realize the importance of it until years later. I think there's times we reflect back and like, wow, I'm glad I was a part of that. But I think was really telling about her in particular, and then you see this amongst many of the civil rights activists, was they didn't go about crowing about it later on. There were some, who made a living off of it, but for the most part, they just went on with their lives.
Yeah.
It wasn't until these anniversaries that people started getting interested in the Freedom Riders and those sort of things. And so it was just, you did it because that's what you're supposed to do, and it was the right thing to do. And only now do people really, even as kids, we didn't really know her story. We saw the photographs and stuff, and we had civil rights people around the house, all the time and things. But those were just old people telling old stories. When I say old, they're my age now. They were what I am now. They were then. And it was like, that's old.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I'm wondering, just listening to you, do you think that, obviously back then her peers who were doing the freedom rides and the sit-ins, her Black peers, they were used to or had been exposed to white hatred, white that feeling of evil around
Right.
you, those people who hated that much. And I would imagine your mom hadn't really faced those kind of things in her youth growing up and everything. Do you
Right.
think that she was caught off guard by really how intense it really was?
Well, I think a lot of people were caught off guard, Black and white.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends on where you lived. Uh, you had the stories that were passed around, but there wasn't the mass media exposure that you have. Most of these events weren't caught on tape, if you will.
Yes.
But yeah, I think my mom says she doesn't deal in fear.
Mm.
And I remember there was a story. I was actually her roommate at Duke was just involved there at Duke, and after that, went home. But they were involved in the sit-ins, and they're coming back one night, and I called her about participating in the documentary. She said, I don't really have any stories. I'm just trying to get some life stories about her time at Duke and so forth. She said, I don't really remember too much. I mean, there was a time we got shot at. That's all. That's really what stood out to me. I was like, what? You got shot at?
Yeah.
So I called my mom up and said, hey, Lucia said you guys got shot at. She goes, oh, yeah, I guess we did. After 2 or 3 times, you kind of forget. Like, of course, Mom. But that just kind of became life.
Yeah.
That kind of became that routine. So you kind of you knew you could die. That was for certain. And if you could live with that, then what could really truly stop you?
So we're talking, and people definitely, I encourage you guys to watch the documentary because it's very moving and very educational.
She is, in my mind, one of those sheroes that demands respect and acknowledgement. Clearly, she was a lady ahead of her time.
She walked through that mob in the Woolworth store. And they realized, of course, immediately where she stood.
She joins Perlina and Annie at the counter, the first white to join the demonstration. And at this, the crowd is just incensed. They become like hornets. They start screaming at her.
She wasn't the outside agitator. She was a white Southerner. She was a white Southern woman. And so for that purpose, she was even more dangerous to the white supremacist power structure. Here's this white Southern woman who's supposed to be protected by the system saying, I don't need this protection and I don't believe in the system. And so that made her incredibly dangerous.
And that cell was 50 feet from the death chamber. That's where we were. As far as the state of Mississippi was concerned, we had committed capital crimes.
We had no doubt we were going to die. Mississippi was known as the deepest of the deep South, the heart of darkness. Somebody was going to die that summer, and it looked like it was us.
But we do learn in the documentary that she was actually disowned by her parents for a period, right?
Right. Yeah.
So go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Please.
No, I was just saying, that being the case, and obviously we'll learn more about the fact that in the documentary that not only did she get disowned by her parents, but the Duke University had her tested for mental illness. They thought she was mentally ill.
Oh yeah.
Because of her dedication to this Black cause, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, and you might be able to answer this, Loki, did she ever kind of doubt herself? Like, well, maybe I am not thinking clearly here when my parents are abandoning me, when everybody, at the school thinks I'm mentally ill. Did she doubt herself?
I don't know if she doubted herself. I think there were times, she never doubted what she was doing. I asked her once, I said, well, why you? She said, why not? What makes you so important? She said, absolutely nothing. I just saw something was wrong and decided to do something about it. And that's what we tell kids. Any of us can make a difference. We just have to make that choice, right? Whatever that might be. Mike O'Brien, who's in the film and who wrote the book "We Shall Not Be Moved," he thinks there was a little time when she would feel isolated.
Yeah.
Even though she says the civil rights movement became family, that became your family, because once you crossed that bridge, you couldn't go back. And that was also true for Black students as well. You couldn't go back home because then you'd be identified, your parents could lose their job, your house could be bombed, those sort of things. But there was this poem she wrote that was kind of this sort of introspective sort of thing, who am I? And this person asking her this question, actually, it's like, who are you? I'm just me, and you're strange, type of thing. But at the end, she's really good at compartmentalizing. So when the task needs to be done, shut off those emotions and go get it done. She's really, really good at that. She probably hate me for saying that, but that's just true. So yeah, so it's weird to kind of think about that a little bit. Just what's the makeup of someone like that? It really takes these civil rights activists. They're a different breed. Quite frankly, it's just I've had people ask me, would you have sat at the lunch counter? I like to say I would. I don't think I would have. Yeah. Quite frankly, but I don't have to because my mom already did. Right. But that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. I think about that myself, man, and the older I've gotten, the more respect I have, especially for, like you said, those college students doing those sit-ins, man. Like, you talk about the courage, I mean, that's just incredible, and you see in the pictures, which, we show here, as we're discussing this, but, just to face and confront that type of hatred and evil, and to not know the outcome, I mean, this is not a movie where somebody's going to say cut. You don't know what this will lead to.
I think I've counted about 7 times my mom has told me a story and said, and this is when I thought we were going to die. You're at war. You're a constant height of tension. I mean, even at Tougaloo College, the Klan would burn crosses on the campus, right off the road, County Line Road, I think it is. But and they would shoot up the houses on campus. So, I mean, this is every day you were dealing with this heightened awareness that you could be killed. It would just be like being a soldier in the field, in battle. You don't know when that day is going to come. You just keep moving forward, keep doing the work. That's the one thing you can control.
Yeah, definitely. So Loki, how did you take the baton from her? In what form does that come in your life?
Take the baton. There's always someone in the family, and then everyone else, all the other siblings go, oh, well, thank goodness they did it. Let them have it. For me, I've always known I want to do film. I've always wanted to do documentaries. I've always been, drawn to these sort of stories to begin with. It just kind of took on a life of its own once I did this film, An Ordinary Hero. Everything just kind of shifted. And for me, I found, my way of doing something. My mom has said, I can't do everything, but I can do something, because doing nothing is not an option. Right. So this is my way of this is my way of doing sit-ins. Right. I was with my mother and Jerry Mitchell, who wrote the book. What's it called? I'm looking over here for my book, Race Against Time. Great book. Jerry Mitchell's an investigative reporter who brought all these Klansmen to justice, these killers, 16th Street Baptist Church bomber, Medgar Evers killer, and so forth. But he's there, Marion Wright Edelman, Rena Evers, Medgar's daughter, Merle Evers, and we're at the house where Medgar was killed. And there's this different people are there as well. And people are kind of going around saying hi. There's almost like this receiving line, if you will. And Rena's on my right, and my mom's on my left. And this lady comes up to Rena and is like, "Oh, Rena, how you doing?" And it's like, I don't remember the lady's name. So she comes to me and she's like, "Who are you?" And I'm like, All right. Well, if I say Loki, she's gonna be like, yeah, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of these like, who are you? Like, man, what are you doing here? And so I just said, well, I'm Joan's son.
Mm.
Joan, I didn't see you. Oh my gosh. This
Yeah,
sort of thing.
yeah.
I was like, oh, gosh, yeah, I'd done this. I already done a couple of films and stuff, and I was feeling pretty good about myself. I mean, I was allowed to be in the room with these legends. I mean, good grief.
Right.
Then Rena leans over and says, "Don't worry, Loki. I don't have a name either. I'm just Megger's daughter."
Mm.
And so, for years, when we talked about this, we want to escape our parents' shadow. We all want to be our own person, and eventually, when you have someone like that, like my mother or like Medgar or whomever, there's a responsibility that comes with continuing that legacy, preserving it and continuing it, and making sure that the work that they did is not in vain.
Mm.
And it just fell upon us. And eventually you realize that it's, no matter what you're going to do, you're always going to be in that shadow.
Mm-hmm.
What a blessing to have that shadow to begin with.
Yes.
And it's definitely opened doors and open opportunities that probably wouldn't have existed before, that has allowed me to share these sort of stories and such, and to do the work that I'm able to do. But I can't skate on that either. So I continue to press forward, to continue to add value to the work that my mother did, and in any way, shape, and form. So that's, again, my brothers are always, we're glad someone's doing it, and we've always been raised very, very independently. And so if I'm doing it, they're not going to touch it, type of thing. We don't get in each other's territories, if you will. So, but they're grateful that it's being done.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about exactly what the foundation does.
Yeah. So the Joan Trumpauer Mulholland Foundation. It's quite a mouthful, but I named it after my mom, and that was a proper thing to do to honor your mother. Apparently, she doesn't agree with that. She's like, you could have picked a better name. You didn't ask my permission. Well, I'm not asking forgiveness either. But so we exist to end racism through education. That's what we're about. And we do that through the films. We do that through our website, through the podcast, through we have a curriculum and books that continue to share the stories of the civil rights movement. I call it the first true American Revolution, because it was for all Americans. It was for everyone. And through that, we try to show kids that they can make a difference, that you don't need to be a Dr. King or a Rosa Parks. We don't need to, be someone that we don't feel we can attain, that's unattainable, right? Mm-hmm. Dr. King is such a god now, right? Mm-hmm. Most kids can't even picture themselves being a Dr. King, though we all could. And so the stories of ordinary people who made a difference, and a lot of these people were ages of elementary school kids, right? And so we try to share those stories to help kids see themselves in particular. And that's one of the things about my mom's picture in particular is that white kids can see themselves as part of a greater collective that we call America. Right? That this is not just a black thing, right? The civil rights movement was an American thing. And that a lot of people were involved. I was actually just talking to a freedom rider today, Charles Pearson, and he was like, yeah, I wish people knew that there was a lot more white people involved in the movement. Then maybe they'd be a lot more interested and understand what it was really all about. And that was literally this morning.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And so my mom's story is this kind of Trojan horse, if you will, particularly for educators. Because one of the challenges you face in education is that 80% of the teachers are white women, but the majority of the students are people of color now.
Okay.
And they don't feel comfortable talking about these things. They don't know if they can talk about them. Is it okay if is this my space? Am I going to come across as racist if I say something? They don't know what to say. And so now comes my mom's story, which opens up to all these other stories. And it kind of brings down the barriers a little bit. Jerry Mitchell once said to me, He says, the greatest thing about your mom's story is the fact that she's white.
Mm.
And it's because most white people don't want to hear about this stuff anymore. Oh my gosh, Dr. King again? Didn't we just talk about that last year?
Yeah.
There's that sort of attitude about that. How much more can you talk about the civil rights movement? We get it, we understand. Well, they don't, but nonetheless. And again, then my mom's story comes along, and they see themselves. Right? Representation is so critical, and we understand that in education that that people of color need to see themselves in history, not just migrant workers in slavery, right? White people, they should feel really good about themselves when they finish their education, because that's all they ever see is white people doing great things, right? But at the same time, when it comes to something like the civil rights movement, and they see my mom in there, or someone like a Bob Zellner or Joan Browning, that suddenly they start to understand, it becomes real, and then they want to start, they really start to want to learn more about the movement.
Right.
So it's a great thing, and it's our foundation. That's what we do. One of our big campaigns that we're kicking off is called 1 Million Students for Change, where our goal is to provide curriculum for free to schools to 1 million students across the country. We do that through donations and our speaking engagements and so forth. So people can go on our website, make a simple donation. I think it's $5 a month, provides curriculum for 30 students. And that's insanely cheap. But it's a lot of a little adds up to a lot. We're already at 30,000 students. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So let me ask you this, obviously, because like you said, the foundation, the aim is to end racism, to make a huge dent into ending it. So I'm just curious as to, and I know you had mentioned this to our producer about that, whatever, Trump himself or what he represents really seems to, propel racists to give them some life or some hope. What do you think it is about him or his ideology, what it embodies that causes racists to overlook his poor character and his poor leadership?
Yeah, boy, particularly poor leadership right now. Well, I can get into a lot about that, but he speaks their language. I mean, he's another opportunist that's come along that, for political gains, is just speaking what they want to hear. He speaks into their fears. George Wallace was the same way, like the governor of Alabama.
Yes.
George Wallace was actually a racial moderate before he became governor. But when he lost, he realized that the only way he was going to win is if he started playing that game, right? To quote him, he said, "I'll never be out-niggered again." That's what he said. And so that's the game he started to play. And we saw that, Richard Nixon, took what he did and turned it into what's called the Southern Strategy, and Bush used it as well. Where Reagan and Bush Sr. and Trump is just another embodiment of that. Playing into those fears that exist that are very real to a lot of white people. They're unfounded, of course. All fear is false evidence appearing real. Take the word as an acronym, right? And so it's just the illusion that they're losing. And there's this fear that white people are going to lose America. When you've been told for 400 years that this is your country, now someone's going to take it away, right? And what's going to happen? What's going to happen to me? I mean, we've been suppressing people for so long. I mean, good grief, it's going to come back on us, right? So that game was played. That's what kept slavery alive, right? That's what kept, that was part of the game of Jim Crow. That's the war on drugs. Everything plays into that. Trump's just another player in this game, and we shouldn't be surprised by it either. By the way, every time there's been progress, there's been a backlash.
Yeah.
When slavery ended, and you had the Jim Crow laws come in, right? Civil rights movement, the war on drugs. Obama, Trump.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't be surprised by this. I think what's happened is, quite frankly, is we got a little comfortable over the past couple decades, if you will, in general, that to see something this open and outward, this manifestation is just unreal. And just the party's divided. There's not a lot of middle ground for people to actually have a real dialogue. There's not real conversations taking place. It's just people shouting at each other. But I talk about this a lot. I actually had someone ask me recently, they said, well, who are you to be talking about diversity and inclusion and these sort of things and racism? And I said, well, if white people created white supremacy, shouldn't we be at the forefront of ending it? Because it's not going to end. Quite frankly, it's just, well, of course, black people are going to talk about it. They've got an agenda. All right, well, yeah, it's called freedom, but nonetheless. But when a white person talks about it, suddenly it's like, well, you really can't ignore that. And you can throw some, some lobs and stuff. Well, I've been told that I have absolute hate for the white race, And when I got my first piece of hate mail, proverbial piece, it was an email, I told my mom and Lou Von Brown and others, and they were like, hey, congratulations, welcome to the club.
Yeah.
Right? My wife wasn't amused. But at least you're making a dent, people are listening. But yeah, it's incumbent upon white people to really give voice to this, to counter the narrative that is being espoused by Trump and his followers. So
yeah. So with the foundation and the mission and the messaging, describe to me what an ideal white person, white parent, kind of their attitude that exists already that your messaging would penetrate so that they would take action. Describe kind of what their attitude would be like even before they met you and your message.
Everyone's so unique and different. I don't know what the ideal person would be. Part of the, there's a film I did called Black, White, and Us. I'm going to pick on that. I'm not pitching here. I'm just saying.
It's all good.
It's about racism through the lens of transracial adoption. It's kind of a mouthful, but it's about these white families who believe that racism didn't exist anymore, and then they adopt these black children. Suddenly, racism is very real to them. It becomes very personal. The problem that you typically face with racism is that white people think they know what it is, and it ain't them. It's black and white photographs. It's bad people. Who's the author of White Privilege? White Fragility. Here we go. We got a book right here. White Fragility. Robin DiAngelo. So she articulates this very, very well, in that we meaning white people, we see racism again as characters of bad people who do bad things, burning crosses, the lunch counter stuff, lynchings. And I'm not a bad person, and I don't do that, so thus I can't be racist. What they don't understand, what they don't see, is the foundation of racism. That yes, our country might have been built on principles, this ideal principles of equality, right? Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that all men are created equal. But that was created on a foundation of racism, and you can't ignore that. I mean, good grief, we codified it in a constitution, right? So but they don't actually see that. They don't quite understand how that plays out, and that we're all downstream of the past. That just because slavery ended or Jim Crow ended doesn't mean racism ended, right?
Right.
So what ends up happening is when you call someone racist, the defenses go up because I'm not that person. Or when you say white people, all of a sudden, like, whoa, wait a second. It's like, okay, look, that's a generic term that's being used. Doesn't mean you necessarily, right? We're really good at sitting there doing the blanket sweep on black people, right? But when that happens to us, oh my gosh, But so from that standpoint, it's finding people who who are willing to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the biggest challenge right now, is people who are willing to listen. That's why we talk to kids, because kids are open. No one's born racist.
Right.
As I tell people, don't worry if your kids aren't racist. Society will take care of it anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because we all learn, everyone, white and black, we learn how to judge people. Everyone is prejudiced. If you grow up in America, you're going to learn that.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter. You can't escape it. My mother, after 70 plus years, still has racist tendencies.
Mm.
People are like, well, how's that possible? Well, she grew up in America. She watched the same TV shows you did. She watched the same news reports. She read the same newspaper.
Yeah.
Right? The same conversations that would take place. Just because she is who she is doesn't mean she doesn't have to work at it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? And you got to be willing to work at it, but you can't do that without the knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're just going to default back to your own tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
That's the easiest thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, the ideal person is someone who's just willing to listen.
Yeah.
Really, quite frankly, that's always just the case. Who knows what's right, and we all do.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of being willing to take that leap to get uncomfortable, because the truth is typically uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We don't like to be uncomfortable, and we protect ourselves. And that's why I tell people, look, you got to have a lot of patience talking to people.
Mm-hmm.
You attack someone's ignorance, they're going to double down on stupid every time.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so you got to be willing to walk with them a little
Mm-hmm.
bit, meet them where they're at, and then bring them along.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Add to that. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's and unfortunately in this world of social media and stuff, we it's too easy to tap a couple keys and hit send and blow someone up.
Yeah.
No one likes to be attacked. So
Mm-hmm.
why would you be surprised when someone just shuts you down, or dives back into their same typical responses
Mm-hmm.
that are just those typical tropes that you see all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because they're just being defensive, and they think and they're taking it very personal.
Mm-hmm.
They think you're talking about them.
Yeah.
And most people aren't that type of racist. They just aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And we too often will brand people as saying something racist. Well, you're a racist. Well, hold on. You have to allow people to be ignorant.
Mm.
I mean, I know a lot of Black people who don't know Black history.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that shocks a lot of white people. And I go, well, why would that be surprising? I mean, where are you, I'll talk to someone, like a white person, I'll go, well, where are you from? They're like, well, my family's Irish. I'm like, okay, tell me some Irish history. They're like, what? Tell me some famous Irishmen. What? I'm like, so give me a break.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's true, definitely, in terms of what you're saying, and also the other additional problem that we've confronted as African Americans is that our history hasn't been taught in schools the way that it should have been, right? So like you said, we know what the curriculum taught us, and we know if we were raised in a family that really cared about passing down history, they would teach us.
Right.
Also, maybe in church and different places like that. But, obviously we don't have the big encyclopedias that, white American history has. We have a little, section of the last volume of a 20-page encyclopedia
right.
about our history. So, it's not only the fact that, maybe some of us haven't made the efforts, but also it hasn't been easy.
It hasn't been easy. No. Well, and I was talking to some educators last week on a Zoom call and so forth, and I talked about this representation and why it was so critical. And to your point on this is that the history that you are taught isn't the right history, and it's sometimes like this lady had come up to me at a conference. This is a story I told him. It was a AAAM conference, Association of African American Museums. And African American lady about my age came up to me and was thanking me for saw the foundation of my mom and so forth. Was thanking us. And she said, when I went to school, elementary school, which would have been the late 70s, early 80s, she said, I was the only Black kid in my class. And then she said, and when we talked about slavery, everyone looked at me. So all I knew about my people was that we were slaves. Mm. Now, I knew for a fact she probably went home and her parents told her something else, right? But look how strong the impression is when you see it in books, when your teacher is telling you as a voice of authority.
Mm-hmm.
And what kid believes their parents anyways, right? So you're in school all this time and you're digesting all of this. This is the diet you're fed. That's going to make an impression, no matter how hard other people try to tell you differently. And so, and then I told the teacher, I said, now, if that's how she felt about herself, imagine how her white peers thought about her.
Mm.
And I was in, gosh, I forget where it was, somewhere in Indiana, some university there. I was speaking to a group of students. I said, tell me famous people in history. There's this huge whiteboard, and we wrote all these names on there. I said, give me some names of famous people in history. Go. And they're like, George Washington. I'm like, okay, George Washington wrote up on the board. Beyonce. Oh, okay, Beyonce, right?
Mm-hmm.
We went through all this. I didn't specify, so all right, go ahead. And by the time we finished, we calculated it. 70% of the people that they talked about were white men, right? There was 5% were women, just women, period, which is interesting because 50% of the population is women. So, but that's through their entire, this is college educated kids, through their entire elementary and primary, secondary, primary, whatever you call it, education. They came out of it with the knowledge that white people is what you want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they saw. That's what education gave them. And so that's where, that's why working with kids is so critical, to bring in these other stories, to help them see themselves, to help the teachers see their kids. And in this film, Black, White, and Us, I come back to this. I talk about this with educators. I said, you need to watch the film if you're an educator, because I know that you say, these are my kids. That's what teachers always say. That's why, well, how much do you really know your kids? What do you really know about them? You need to be like these white parents. Right? So to come back to your original question about what the ideal parent is, the ideal parent would be a white adoptive parent.
Utah leads the U.S. in the rate of transracial adoption. Surprising, right? What do most people think of when they think of Utah? They think of Mormon and they think of white.
So if you want to see what whiteness looks like, this is a good sample of what it looks like.
There was a teacher who threw out cotton on the floor and remarked like, oh, the black kids pick it up so fast.
I get comments about, you're reading too much into this, Carol. Why are you so focused on race?
We lost sisters, brothers, mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, neighbors.
There's an incredibly robust and profitable industry based in Utah who market their services to birth mothers in the inner city throughout the U.S.
Whoa, are you really gonna say it's supply and demand to skin color? Because there's more going on to that, and we have to acknowledge that.
I remember coming back from lunch, and I was walking down the hallway. There was a group of people in KKK robes.
And I think that if we're gonna have social change, and if whites are responsible for that, these parents are the ones that will lead.
These children are black in a white world.
They are forced to make racism personal. It's not about someone else. It's about their kids. It's about them. And I tell people, sometimes with the screens of the films, and I'll say to people, so how good of a friend? I say, okay, it's always typically a good mixed audience. I said, okay, this is just for the white people in the audience, because I said, I know all of you have a black friend. Every white person has a black friend. There's some mythical black friend you have. How good of a friend are you? Right? Do you believe them when they tell you something that happened, or do you brush it off and try to qualify it? Maybe that's not what they meant. Mm-hmm. Or maybe you misunderstood the police. Those sort of things. It's like, just believe me. When someone tells you that something happens, just believe it. Give them the benefit of the doubt. As I think Lou Von Brown said to me in a recent podcast, is black people are guilty from birth. You have to prove their innocence every day. Mm-hmm. White people, it's just assumed you are.
Right. I agree with that totally. Obviously, number one, you have wonderful stories and have and you're well read in terms of what you're working with in terms of your mission of your foundation there. So how could people continue to listen to you, learn from you, engage with you through your podcasting and so forth?
I appreciate that. Yeah. So we have the podcast called The Uncomfortable Truth, which is an extension of the film. So that's the film that won the Emmy. But I'm proud of it.
Absolutely. I was going to ask you about it.
Yeah. So The Uncomfortable Truth is this film. It's about the history of institutional racism in America. It's how we got to where we are. Now, you have to understand a little bit about the film in and of itself is that it's not pointing fingers at other people. Because remember when I said if you attack people, they're just going to double down on stupid. The walls will go up, right? So the film actually points fingers back at my family. Our family goes all the way back to 1610. We're one of the original planter elites. We served in the House of Burgess. We had 2 plantations. You went to school at Hampton, down the Hampton Roads, right?
Yes.
We used to own that area. So, so we helped start the whole thing, right? And ever since my mom, we've been working to dismantle that, what we helped create. So that film gives you this whole interesting dynamic about American history and takes you through that. The podcast, now the film is primarily LaVon Brown and I. LaVon's a freedom rider. My mom was the first white woman he ever trusted. And him and I just kind of hit it off. And he's in An Ordinary Hero. And there's a thing he says in Ordinary Hero, well, as we're shooting An Ordinary Hero, that becomes a catalyst for The Uncomfortable Truth. And it's in the film, The Uncomfortable Truth. But so LaVon and I decided, let's do a podcast to extend the conversation that started in The Uncomfortable Truth, because we have a very good rapport with each other. We're friends. We have a very intimate relationship that allows us to have a conversation that, quite frankly, needs to be had, but a lot of white people just aren't having because they don't have those relationships. We're still a very hyper-segregated society. Yes, you might have that friend at work or that friend on Facebook, but they're not going to have conversations with you because they don't trust you. And there's a level of trust that LaVon and I have developed over the years that I can ask some of the questions that, quite frankly, people would look really cross at me for. But I ask them because I'm trying to sit there in the mind of the average white person who really wants to know. For example, we have a podcast that's all about, can Black people be racist? Because white people say that all the time. But Black people are racist. They're racist, they're racist to me too. I'm like, oh, okay, well, technically Black people can't be racist in American society. So, but let's have that discussion. Right? What does that look like? What does that mean, and so forth? And so him and I, that's what we do. So there's that. You can find us on Facebook. We got our foundation page, Instagram. I think we do some Twitter stuff as well. It all feeds together. But I have my own website as well, LokiMulholland.com, where I have my blogs and my podcasts as well. That all feeds into this. We speak around the country. Right now, of course, we're not running around the country, but I said just the other week, I was doing a Zoom call with about 19 educators on the topics of diversity and inclusion. So all of that exists. That's what we're trying to do.
And can you actually tell us the foundation's website once again?
Yeah, foundation website is thejtmfoundation.org. So THEJTMfoundation.org. Or you can type in Joan Trumpauer Mulholland. It's a little long, so but if you Google my mom, I think the foundation is like the 5th item on the list. So
okay,
on the front page of Google's search terms when it comes to my mother. So
sure. All right. Well, terrific. So, you and I talked about this off camera about obviously the theme of the network, or I should say the theme of the show, Black Refresh 2020, just talking about this pause in history with this pandemic, and many people are staying at home, and we don't know how long some variation of this stay at home will last, right? We just don't know, but because it's a pause in American history, we really have the opportunity as African Americans to kind of step back, reassess, galvanize, decide to unite and move together in a positive direction, and take ownership of some of our issues and not wait for those that have harmed us, who have stunted us and so forth, to solve things for us, right? But on your end, because you are actually solving things on the other side, right?
Mhm.
You know, you are on the other side helping to educate, people who are white to understand what racism is and to identify it within themselves,
Right.
and to hopefully solve some of those issues. So at the conclusion of this pandemic pause, if you kind of had your way and your wish list, what would you like things to look like from the work that you do and the impact it has?
Well, first, I'd like to see someone get out of the White House, first and foremost. But I don't make it too political here. But honestly, I want to see dialogue. I want to see a space where people can have honest conversations, where people aren't judging each other. One of the things that happens is that we'll get into a space. Someone asks an honest question, and everyone gets lit over it. And it's like, hold on. So if we can't ask those questions, if we can't have that dialogue, what ends up happening is white people retreat. Quite frankly, they the second they get attacked, they're like, see, there they go again, right? And again, that's why I come back to that. There's that exercise of patience, so to allow people to actually speak and ask questions, because that's really where it's going to happen. It's one person at a time, and that's what I try to do. So what I hope to do when things get back to normal in regards of the pandemic and so forth, and people are back at school, is that we can really start to work with teachers even more. I mean, getting the education material to the kids is great, but and you can change a student, but if we can change this teacher, man, how many thousands of students come through that door over the years, and really to be able to make that impact and have those levels of information. You got to grade it up, and so every step of the way, we want to be able to provide people with information that as their mind opens and expands, they're seeing things and learning new things and such. So even on our website for educators, we have an educators tab, which educators can tap into, and we have an interactive civil rights map, and we have the films, education versions, and we even have a section about here's some books to go read, go educate yourself. Don't just listen to us, and listen to other people as well. I'm a member of a particular fraternity. And, my ADP said, he says all the time, Pastor Lynch, he says, we need each other to survive. And we truly do. We truly do.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I'm glad you pointed out that you are a member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Actually, for our audience, we produced a documentary called The White Bruh.
Yeah. Oh, you did that one?
Yeah, that was me. That was
all
me.
Right.
Yeah. So hopefully, if you haven't seen it, it would give you kind of answers to questions of our African American brothers in the fraternity, like why would somebody want to do it, their experiences. So since you brought it up, I might as well plug it.
yeah. Well, that's cool. Yeah. There's more. There's more than just me. So
exactly. But anyway, man, like I said, I really, really appreciate the work that you're doing, man. And
thank you.
And you definitely are, as they used to say, a chip off the old block. You know what I'm saying?
I appreciate that.
You know what I mean? Because your mom did not take the easy way out. She had to climb that mountain. And she could have just walked around it, avoided it, but she climbed it. And the work that you're doing, that's not easy work either, and that's something that, you're climbing that mountain, man. And I really believe you're going to leave a legacy. And I pray that both of us, are able to accomplish what we want for, the American race, the human race, all of those kind of things. So thanks so much, Loki, for what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thanks for coming on board.
Right on.
All right. Take care.
All right. You too now.
Rue.